Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Internet Computer Developer Journey. In today's episode 3.5, Identities and Authentication, we're going to be exploring the different types of identities and methods of authentication that you can use on the Internet computer. Now, in previous tutorials, we have briefly touched on a form of identity known as the developer identity, which is what we used when we acquired Cycles, and we had to create a developer identity in order to create a Cycles wallet and then to obtain Cycles that were held in that Cycles wallet. And then we also briefly looked at ICP tokens and how they were stored in a ledger account. And so those are two forms of identity and accounts on the Internet computer. But today we're also going to be taking a look at Internet identity. So Internet identity is ICP's native form of digital identity that can be used to authenticate with different applications, such as the NNS dashboard or OpenChat. And the cool thing about Internet identity is that you don't need to manage a username or password. Instead, Internet identity uses a cryptographic key pair that's stored in your local computer's hardware. This is a simple and flexible authentication method that developers can use to provide their end users with a frictionless way to authenticate and use their application. So first, let's briefly go through the different types of identity. So I just mentioned a couple, but let's break them down. So first we have our developer identity, which is something that's created using DFX. This uses a private and public key pair, and it has a principal data type that is derived from the public key of that key pair. This most of the time can be compared to Bitcoin or the Ethereum wallet address that you would use on either of those chains. The term principal refers to a generic identifier, and these are used for users, canisters, and they could potentially be used for other future ICP concepts. There is intentionally no way to tell the difference between a canister principal ID and a user principal ID. A principal identifier is a principal associated with a user principal ID. Principal identifiers are related to account identifiers, but they use a different format. Each principal identity can control multiple accounts in the ICP ledgers. So a principal identifier is going to relate to an account identifier, and that account identifier is going to be used on the ledger account where you are holding ICP or other tokens. And so that leads us into account identifier is the identifier associated with your ledger account. You can read more about that in the ledger specification. Then we also use the term wallets. These are a pretty universal term across Web3, but on ICP, they are used to store different forms of currency and other assets. They can be used to store Cycles, ICP, or NFTs. Currently, developers primarily use the Cycles ledger to send Cycles to and from canisters. This is a new workflow that has been introduced recently at the time of recording this video. So if you are unfamiliar with the Cycles ledger, please check out the documentation on that to get up to date on that new workflow. And then lastly, we have Internet identity. This is ICP's native authentication service. It doesn't use usernames and passwords. Instead, it uses a passkey stored in your local device's hardware. And so for today's tutorial, we are primarily going to be taking a look at Internet identity and how we can first create an Internet identity, and then how we can create a small application that authenticates with Internet identity. The other forms of identification that we just covered have been mentioned and utilized in previous tutorials. So if you need a refresher on any of those terms and how to use them, go ahead and check out the playlist of all of the Developer Journey videos on YouTube. So Internet identity can be compared to the sign in with Google option that you sometimes see on different websites when it's asking you to authenticate with an account on that website, and it gives you the option to just sign in with your Google account. So you don't need to make a new username or password specifically for that website. You can just use your Google authentication. And so Internet identity is similar to this, but instead of registering with a username and password, you're going to be using that passkey, which is a unique cryptographic public-private key pair that is stored within the secure hardware chip on your phone or your computer. This also allows Internet identity to authenticate with other methods that you can use to unlock your phone or your computer, such as Touch ID or Face ID. The other key feature of Internet Identity is that a different identity is issued for each app that you authenticate with using your Internet Identity, and those different identities cannot be linked back to the user. So no personal data is shared with any of the apps or the Internet Identity application itself, and there isn't any software that needs to be downloaded or installed. So now just a brief overview of the Internet Identity architecture. Internet Identity uses an implementation of the Web Authentication API, and it runs within a single canister that serves both the front-end application code and the backend that handles the requests sent by the front-end code. The app's authentication service uses delegations on the user's behalf, which are signed with private cryptographic material generated by the WebAuth API that is owned by the user. This private material never leaves the user's device and is stored in the local hardware securely. Then the II front end uses the WebAuth API to sign the delegation with the cryptographic material. So that's just a brief overview. If you want more details on how the architecture specifically works, please refer to the Internet Identity specification. And so just to reiterate, a passkey is that public-private key pair that is stored on your local device's secure hardware chip, and it can be used for other biometric authentication options like Face ID or Touch ID. So now we're going to go through how to create an Internet Identity. So for this, we're going to navigate to the Internet Identity front end, and it's going to open up a window that asks you to choose your identity. You can see that I have a couple already created, but we want to create a new one. So I'm going to click on more options, and it's going to ask me to either enter an existing Internet Identity, continue with another device such as my phone, but today I'm going to create new. And then we want to create with a passkey. So we are going to click Create Passkey. And for this, you can choose to use any of the authentication methods to create and store your passkey. You can use things such as iCloud's keychain. You can use your phone or tablet. For this, I'm just going to select your Chrome profile, since this is only going to save the passkey on this computer that I'm currently using to interact with this web browser now. So this is fine for our tutorial right now, and I'm going to confirm that this passkey will only be saved on this device and click continue. Then we're going to have a CAPTCHA that we need to fill out and make sure that we are not a robot, and we will verify that. And then we'll see you've created an Internet Identity. Save this number by taking a screenshot or writing it down. And so I am just going to take a quick screenshot of that and then click I saved it, continue. And then we can see a couple of options. We can connect to several different applications in the ICP ecosystem. We can add additional passkeys. So remember, I only created the one on Chrome that is just stored on this computer, but if I wanted to create a backup on my phone, I could click Add New Passkey and then follow the instructions to add one for my phone. And then I could also set up recovery methods such as a recovery phrase or a recovery device. And these are all recommended that you go through and do for your primary Internet Identity. Today, this one that I've created is just going to be for the sake of this tutorial, so I won't go through and do all of this for this identity, but for your identity that you're going to be using to log into several applications and use as your primary way of authenticating, you should definitely go ahead and implement those necessary recovery steps. So then I'm just going to scroll down since we went through and followed those steps together. And now we're going to take a look at integrating Internet Identity into your application. So for this, we are going to first need to follow our developer environment setup instructions if you haven't already. And then we are going to create a new project. So I'm going to navigate into my developer journey category. I am going to start DFX with DFX start, clean background. And we're going to make sure that that gets started and is running properly. And then once we see that the local replica has been initialized, we can go ahead and clone the project that we are going to be using for this. So this is an auth client demo, and we are going to use git clone. then we are going to navigate into that auth client demo directory. So now that we are in this subdirectory for this auth client demo, let's take a look at our dfx.json file. And we can see that in our canisters, we have a canister listed as pullable, and we have some dependencies for that. So that means that we need to pull this who am I canister. And to do that, we are going to use dfx deps deploy. And we've talked about dfx deps in a previous tutorial. And let's see. And so we can see that the pulled wasm that we have stored locally doesn't match the expected hash in the pulled.json file. So let's fix that with dfx deps pull to pull the latest wasm for that canister ID. And then we can use dfx deps deploy to create that canister using that pulled wasm. And we can see that we have the internet identity canister being pulled locally. And if we go ahead and look at dfx.json, we can see that our internet identity canister is type pull, and it is this ID here. And we can see that in our previous output, this canister was created and installed with that identity, and that is because we pulled the wasm file for it. And also from this file, we can see that we have this who am I canister with the code at main.mo. So let's take a look at this source code to see what this canister does. And here we can see that it has just a simple query function called who am I, and it is going to respond with the messages caller. And so this is how we are going to test if we are logged in and authenticated with an internet identity or not. And so we can also take a look at the front end of this application. So if we look at this source auth client demo assets index.ts file, we can see that we are importing some packages from the DFINITY auth client, and then we are defining some variables that are used to define a day in nanoseconds. And then we also have some default options, including login options that are defined down here. These allow the identity provider to be either the II mainnet canister if you are using the local environment variable DFX network and it's set to II, or if you are using the local deployment of the internet identity canister, which is this localhost 4943, and then canister ID with that canister ID of the internet identity canister. It's important to note that your local replica will not accept signatures from the mainnet canister in this example. Then if we scroll down a little bit more, we can see that the next bit here is the part of the code that is going to initialize the auth client. You can check to see if the user has previously logged in, and if so, their identity is already verified. And then lastly, we have a function that listens for the button on the UI interface on the front end to be clicked and initialize the client. So if that button is clicked, the init code is going to be fired, and it's going to determine if the identity that clicked the button has been authenticated or not, and if it hasn't, it's going to go through the authentication process. And so then here are the instructions for pulling the internet identity canister. We already took a look at this, so we're just going to skip through this portion. And now we need to go ahead and initialize that internet identity canister. So we're going to run dfx deps init. And we are going to see that this canister has already set up the init argument when we initialized it and pulled it, but if we didn't have this init argument and we got this warning that the canister required one, we'd be able to follow these steps to initialize it. And then since our canister was already deployed with dfx steps deploy, we can go ahead and run dfx deploy to run both the internet identity canister and then also the authentication who am I canister, the backend canister. So we will go ahead and deploy those. And it can't find this. And so it looks like we have an error where it can't find the Vite plugin. So let's go ahead and see if npm install will fix that for us. So we can see that I tried to run npm install to resolve this Vite plugin environment error that it couldn't find this module. So I ran npm install to try and resolve that. And instead of resolving it, I got this npm error where it can't find DFINITY, it can't find the file for DFINITY Identity 0.20.2. So then I went to the DFINITY/identity package here on npm.js.com, and I went to the versions by clicking on versions, and then found that there isn't a published version called 0.20.2. And so that is what is most likely causing this error. So I'm going to open the package.json file, and I'm going to scroll down to the dependencies. And while I was looking at this, I also found out that the other packages, such as the auth client that are all 0.20.2, these all get released together. So I saw that there wasn't an auth client 0.20.2 either. So I'm going to go through here and I'm going to just update all of these to the latest version, which is 1.3.0. So we're going to 1.3.0. And then that just assures us that we have the latest up-to-date version of all of these packages. And I'm going to save that, and then let's run npm install again and see if we still have that error. And we can see that that went fine. And so now we can run dfx deploy. And our Vite error that we got saying we couldn't find that Vite environment module should be now resolved since we are able to install our dependencies. And it looks like it was successful. And then we are going to run npm start to start the front end of our application. And so it says that it's ready here at this localhost address. And so here we just have a very simple little window that says Internet Identity Client. You are not authenticated to log in and click this button. So let's log in. It's going to make a call to the local Internet Identity canister. So after a bit of troubleshooting, I found out that in our source auth client demo assets vanilla index.ts file where we defined the logic for our authentication method that happens when we click this login button. Here where the identity provider is defined, it's using this localhost canister ID format of the URL. So this is the primary domain URL, but we can switch this to use a subdomain instead by calling the canister URL as a subdomain of localhost, and that should give us the fix. So let's take a look at doing that. So I'm just going to open this up in VI here. You can open up this file in any IDE of your choice. And then I'm just going to go down to this URL here and remove it. And make sure that I don't have an extra space in the front. Okay, so that should fix that for us. And now if we do dfx deploy again and redeploy our canisters, okay, and then if we do npm start, we already have this open, so we'll refresh it and then we'll click login, and we'll see that now it's going to use the subdomain URL instead. And we can see that instead of getting that white screen, we have the internet identity screen. And please remember that this is locally deployed, so this is for testing only. Do not use any of your mainnet internet identity credentials or passkeys or anything like that. And so then for this, I'm just going to create one without a passkey, since this is just for demonstration purposes only, but you can go ahead and create one if you'd like. And then because there is no passkey, it's going to ask for a PIN. And so I'm just going to type in a PIN real quick. And then since this is testing, the CAPTCHA is just always going to be just the letter A. And then the default testing internet identity is always going to be the number 10,000. So I'm just going to click saved it. And this should now authenticate back to our client. And so now we can see that we are authenticated. To see how a canister views you, click this button. So who am I? And now it's going to pass the full identity value for my internet identity. And then I can log out and then log in again. And now I don't need to recreate that internet identity. I can just log in with the one I just created and then use the PIN to authorize. And then we're back here, and then we can authenticate with that again. So that's going to wrap up today's tutorial. Please remember to like and subscribe to the DFINITY YouTube channel if you enjoyed today's tutorial, and be sure to check out the other videos in the Internet Computer Developer Journey playlist if you haven't already. In the next episode, 3.6, we're going to be tackling the next level of Motoko code development, and we're going to be using some of the concepts about identity that we learned in today's video in the next one, so be sure to check that out. If you have any questions, be sure to check out the DFINITY Discord server and the DFINITY Developer Forum. Both of those have threads for the Internet Computer Developer Journey, where you can chat with other ICP astronauts who are also on their developer journey. That'll wrap things up for today. Take care.